and it should probably take just under an hour too. So pretty much same as the other ones. Okay, so this chapter is sometimes called lifespan. Other times it's referred to as developmental psychology. Depends on what text you look in. But the definition, you're looking at changes that occur in individuals from the womb to the tomb. So physical changes, how our thoughts change, cognitive changes, as well as social changes. Turn them on. Get this recording. Okay. So we looked at physical changes first that occur, and of course, life begins at conception. So there's often this comparison to one egg released by the female to 2 million sperm. If one of the sperm penetrate the egg and fertilization occurs, that then is called a zygote. So I don't know why that, but there is usually a question, like the comparison to one egg to 200 million sperm. The other questions, the other options on that question are pretty outlandish. It's like the egg is comparable to like 5. They're all low numbers. That's the only high number. So, all right. So you have the fertilized egg, and that occurs in the fallopian tube. And then we needed to look at the 3 stages of prenatal development. But what's going to happen during that first stage when fertilization occurs, the egg will travel from the fallopian tube to the uterus and then implant on the uterine wall. And that is the germinal period. And that lasts anywhere between 10 to 14 days, depending on the individual. And again, here you can see, I forget to move this when I start talking. And here you can see the zygote is going to travel down the fallopian tube and then implant on the uterine wall. And then when that occurs, we go to the second stage. Now, another thing that's happening is cellular division, and it's also referred to as germination. So what's happening is you have the one zygote, the one egg. After about 12 hours, that egg divides into 2. And then a few hours later, those 2 divide into 2 more, and the process continues until they develop into your organs and your body parts. That's what cellular division is. All right, so then we go into the second stage, and this stage will last from about 2 weeks to roughly 8 or 9 weeks. So okay, around 2 months here, from 2 weeks to 2 months. This is when the organs are formed, and all of them begin to function except for the lungs. So the organs are all formulated and function by 2 months. After that, you go into the third stage, and that is the fetus or fetal stage. And one of the main functions here is basically to grow, because the embryo at the end of this stage is going to be 1/2 inch and weigh a couple ounces. That's tiny, to where the average baby is about 7.5 pounds and 21 inches long. So they're doing a lot of growing during those last 7 months. Also, the fine details are formed, like the fingernails, the eyelashes, eyebrows, things like that. And it is referred to as the age of viability because this is when they can survive outside of the womb on their own. And that's around 6.5 months. That's when the lungs develop. So prior to that, if a baby's born before 6.5 months, they would need assistance with their breathing. So a question I often see here is about the fetal stage and the lungs developing. That's exclusive. And they usually have a question from one of these 3 stages. So cellular division is usually the connection with germination, and organs forming during the embryonic stage. So those are the 3 main questions. There you can see how much they grow from during that fetal stage. All right, so the placenta is the organ that is attached here to the top of the uterine wall, and it consists of one artery and two veins, and it's attached to the baby's belly button, that's the umbilical cord, and that's going to provide the baby with the nutrients and oxygen that it needs. It's supposed to filter out harmful substances, but a lot of things can cross the placenta and actually harm the baby. And anything that can cross over, we refer to as a teratogen. And this could even be stress. This is any type of medication. There are very few medications you can safely take when you're expecting. A virus. We know that when women have high fevers, specifically during the second trimester, the middle part, when the nervous system is developing, that can lead to a lot of serious conditions in the child. One, we know schizophrenia, which we'll talk about here in a couple of days, has been linked to being in the womb and the mother having a virus. But this could be like even household cleaners can cross over and cause harm to the mental capability as well as physical harm to the child. The most common question with teratogens will be FAS. So we know that drinking alcohol when you're pregnant can lead to fetal alcohol syndrome, which will cause the child to have physical abnormalities. There's certain characteristics you can tell at birth if a child has FAS, but also cognitive abnormalities, cognitive limitations. They can't think abstractly. And they don't obviously do as well on a cognitive test in children their own age. It says heavy drinking, but they don't know. Like some women report only having a couple of drinks and they have a child with FAS, where some women have drank very, very heavily and their child hasn't been born with FAS. But it's sad. It's not something that's genetic. It's just something that could have been avoided. All right, then we look at the newborn. We talked about a few reflexes. Of course, a reflex is something you're born with, an automatic movement. The newborn has many that allow it to survive right after birth. One, grasping. They can grasp down. If you put anything in the palm of their hand, they grasp over it, suckling. They can suck, swallow, and breathe at the same time. Rooting reflex. If you brush their cheek, they'll turn in that direction to search for food. And I showed you the sternum moro. Any sudden movement or loud sound, they fan their arms and legs out and then curl back in. And immediately after birth, immediately after the bonding process takes place and the baby is all cleaned up, the pediatrician will come in and assess all of these to make sure the nervous system is working properly. And all of these fade. Obviously, if someone puts something in your hand, you don't just automatically do that or search for food. But some reflexes continue, like blinking. If you blow air in someone's face, they will blink. That continues from birth and forever. Looking at their senses at birth. So this is a common question here, that they lack color vision. The question usually states the senses are all proficient, with the exception, because most of their senses, babies can hear and feel and taste just like we do, with the exception of high-pitched sounds. But it'll say something about the senses being, or the vision being immature, and what specifically do they lack, and it's color vision. And I told you this, a lot of people say, how can you tell if a baby can see color? You can't ask them. So if you remember from the chapter on sensation, we have two photoreceptors in the retina. What are they called? You guys remember? One allows you to see color, the other one in black, white shades, and gray. Very good. So your cones don't develop until between 1 to 2 months. So that's how we know that babies can't see color. And I talked about strabismus. As babies grow, they don't really get to 20/20 vision till about 6 months of age. They can only see about from the distance from a nursing baby to the mother's face at birth, and then they gradually gain distance. Everything's kind of fuzzy beyond that. But the eye muscles have to strengthen. And it takes a while because they have to turn their head when they look at things because they can't move their eyes yet. The muscles are too weak. And I said, as they are starting to strengthen, they start to use their eyes. It's kind of scary because sometimes their eyes can go cross. Something goes this way, something goes that way, and they're cross-eyed. But the vision returns back to normal just within a couple seconds, and that's called strabismus. All right, a few preferences that we looked at, and the question that comes up now and again is about the faces. Babies prefer like something that looks like this, a face, as opposed to something that might be confusing like that. And again, how do you know what a baby prefers? They use gaze duration. Like how long, I mean, we look at things longer if we're interested in it. So do babies. So that's how they gauge whether or not they like something. And babies tend to migrate towards the smell and the sound of their mother. Again, that makes sense. They were in the mother's womb for 9 months. Makes sense that they would prefer that. Habituation. Babies like new things, and we're the same way. You know, we prefer change and something new occurring. We get tired with the same old thing, and that's habituation. So if you show a baby an object, the first time they see it, they may look at it for about 40 seconds. Second time, like, yep, already saw that. So it might be half of that, and then it continues to go down. So that's not just exclusive to babies. I think all people are like that. All right, then we looked at the physical development of the child, and this is referred to as maturation. Think about maturing. That's the physical growth process, the biological growth process. And that is a common question too, that you see just the definition of that, which should be easy. Just think of maturing. I've seen this question maybe on one of the tests about the sequence and the timing. So we know that they all go through the same sequence where the baby learns to control their neck muscles, and they can push themselves up, then they can roll over on their back, then they can roll completely over, then they learn to sit, then they learn to stand, then walk, etc. We all go through that same sequence, but when children go through it is very different. And I can tell you, parents get upset if their kids are delayed in these, but until they're physically ready, the parts of the body and the muscles are ready, they can't perform these tasks. But they'll get there. My daughter is going through this right now. My grandbaby just turned a year. Her friend has a baby who's 2 weeks older, and he's been walking for like 3 weeks. And her son is not even, I mean, he's holding on to things and walking, but won't take any steps. She's like, why can't he walk yet? Why can't he walk yet? And I'm like, he'll get there. He'll get there. But it really bothers parents. So, all right, there you can see that's the different sequence. I only mentioned this the one time. Do you guys have that in your notes? The infantile amnesia, because I couldn't remember when I talked about that. But so at birth, there are very few neural connections, as you can see here. Okay. And actually, there's not a strong connection to the memory centers of the brain, like the hippocampus. So things that occur in childhood are not going to be stored. And so we don't really remember anything until those neural connections get strong around 3.5 to 4. So prior to, and it depends on the person, 3.5 to 4 years of age, prior to that, we don't remember anything. We often think we do because we've heard a story. And that's why I talked about like memory construction. I have a very vivid memory of a dog chasing, following me after I got off the bus, and I threw my pocketbook at him. I was probably in pre-K, and I'm sure I don't remember that, but my grandma told me that story over and over and over again. So I continually think that I had a memory of it. All right, so that's everything with the physical changes of the child. Next thing we're going to do is look at the cognitive changes that occur in childhood. And here we see the term cognition. And we've talked about that before. This is thinking, knowing. This is memory. This is communicating. This is all of our higher mental tasks. And who is the leading developmental psychologist? You guys remember his name? There's the P. Piaget, yes. Jean Piaget. He's a Swiss developmental psychologist, and his theories and ideas that he came up with, we still look at today. Prior to his work, it was thought that children were just stupid versions of adults. And he's the one, through extensive testing, oh my goodness, he tested his own kids, he tested his kids' friends, he tested anybody he could. He found that that's not the case. We actually think differently at different stages. So, we have physical milestones that we go through, sitting, standing, walking, etc. There's also mental milestones that we will accomplish too. But before we get to those stages, he came up with a 3-step learning process on how we retain information. All right, so this is his 3-step process. First of all, we develop schemas. These are folders, these are categories or concepts that we group similar information into. So, like I said, we have a schema for tools, I would say holidays, school supplies. So they're just like our categories. In the chapter on thinking and language, we call this actually a concept. Same definition, just a different term. He calls them schemas. So oftentimes when we come across things that we're unfamiliar with, that we don't have words for, we just group it into an existing schema. So I gave you the example, a child learns a schema for dog. The family gets a pet. So he realizes a dog has fur and walks on 4 legs. So then they're riding down the road and he sees a horse. He's never heard the word horse before, so he can't pull that out of thin air, but it has fur and 4 legs. So he calls it a dog. And same with a car, learns that a car has wheels and it moves. So when they see a bus, never heard bus, so they call it a car. They're grouping it with something similar. And that's the second stage called assimilation. So you're assimilating new information into an existing schema. That horse, they call a dog. That bus, they call a car. So then the next step usually involves somebody older in the family saying, no, that's not a dog. It's a horse. A horse is much larger, has a mane, and points out the differences. Or that's not a car, that's a bus. A bus is big and yellow and transports kids to school. So then they have to change their existing schema and come up with a new one. And that is referred to as accommodation. And accommodate means change. So they have to create a new schema for horse and a new schema for bus. Not everything with wheels and moves is a car. And think of accommodation as change. We looked at accommodation and the chapter on sensation also. If you recall, the changing shape of the lens is referred to as accommodation. So both are a change. All right, so that brings us to Piaget's cognitive theory of development. First stage, the sensory motor stage. So this is birth to 2 years. And during this stage, it's called sensory motor because babies are learning about their world through their senses. They don't learn by reading a book or sitting in class. Bless you. So they're just taking everything in. Think of all the new things they're going to see in those first years. Think of all the things they're going to hear, taste. Oh my goodness. Anything you put in a baby's hand or they can get a hold of, it goes in the mouth. You have to really watch them. And it's just amazing to watch them. They're so amazed with everything and they love to take in all that new information. And they're going to learn to move and motor around. So that's why it's the sensory motor stage. Object permanence. That is the milestone that they accomplish during this stage. So object permanence, they begin to recognize that things exist when out of sight. And this is different for all babies, but it's usually between 9 and 12 months of age. Usually by 1 year of age, they have developed that. And I know that my grandson has developed it because now when they drop him off at daycare, he goes to the kids' corner down here at school 3 days a week. And before, when they dropped him off, he didn't cry because you walk out the door, they forget. But now he gets a little upset and they have to like calm him down when they leave. So before that, you can cover up the little toy like I showed you and they just forget what was even there. They just look around. So that's the mental milestone during the first stage. The second stage, this is the preschoolers. So pre-operational stage. Preschoolers, they're learning about their world through pretend play, like dress up, play with tools, they play store and things like that. They're learning to speak, but we look at language development in a different chapter. But they lack logical reasoning. They will believe anything you said. Like I told you, everything's magical. The tooth fairy is real, Santa Claus is real, and whatever you tell them, they believe. Egocentrism is the major milestone that is accomplished here. So people usually think that that means that you like yourself. Actually, it's learning to put yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding what other people think. So whatever a young preschooler thinks or sees, they think you're thinking that, they think you're seeing that. And that's why children, they say out of the mouths of babes, they're very rude. They say exactly what they think because they think you believe that as well. Now that should change. You should be able to take someone else's perspective around the age of kindergarten, like around 5 for most students or most children. And if that happens, we say they've developed theory of mind. Okay, so a theory of mind is understanding others' thoughts. If a child, if it persists past maybe 7 and a child still cannot put themselves in someone else's place and continues to say very rude things and maybe have some inadequacy in their social interactions, then they may be tested for autism because someone who's autistic cannot understand what other people are thinking. And oftentimes they'll say things that are pretty rude because they don't understand that it's hurtful. And they usually have an impairment, like I said, with their social interaction. I think I showed you this. This is one of the assessment tools that a pediatrician uses when they look for autism. So they say to the child, this is Sally, this is Ann. Sally puts her ball in the red cupboard, and then Sally goes away. Okay. Ann moves the ball to the blue cupboard. Where will Sally look? Well, we know that Sally's going to leave. She left it in the red cupboard. She's probably going to look there when she comes back. But an autistic child won't say that. They say, well, she'll look in the blue cupboard because they're just seeing what happened. And that will be their answer. They can't put themselves in Sally's place. So, all right. So then the third stage is the concrete stage. This would be the school age children. So you're looking at maybe first grade until you get to middle school. And it's called concrete because children are performing basic concrete mathematical transactions, things that are tangible, things that you can represent, like adding, subtracting, multiplication, division, nothing abstract at this point. This is when they start to think logically and they question everything. So they no longer believe everything you tell them and the magic goes away. Seriation. I don't think I've ever put the definition up here, but that's putting things in order from largest to smallest or smallest to largest. So he is actually criticized for putting that task in this age group because there's a lot of preschoolers that could arrange things in order, especially if they've had help and they've been shown, okay, this is putting things in order by length. A lot of preschoolers can do that before the age of 6 or 7. So the basic task here is, or the milestone is conservation. So this is recognizing if the form changes, the amount stayed the same. And I love that video with the little girl. I don't know if you guys were here that day, but she's counting the pennies, and the lady puts like 3 pennies down and then 3 more behind them. And she said, do these have the same amount, or does one have more? She said, well, they have the same amount. But then when you space them out, those 3 look longer. So a child that lacks conservation will say that's more. You know, and the fluid, you have 2 containers that are the same, but you pour one into a tall, skinny glass, they'll say that's more because it's higher, it looks larger. So that, depending on the child, but most children develop conservation between 8 and 9. All right, and then the last stage, this is where when we go through adolescence, you're looking here anywhere between 11 to 13, whenever you hit puberty. And this is when you begin to think abstractly and develop morals, understanding why we have rules and regulations, thinking more philosophical, thinking deeper about issues. You can't do algebra before you've developed abstract thought, because I guess I never developed it. I can't understand or wrap my head around math, but you can't have those imagined outcomes until you've developed this. That's why I could never teach algebra in like elementary school, and even a lot of 6th graders struggle with algebra, or well, 8th graders take it, right? A lot of 8th graders will struggle with algebra in middle school too. They just haven't developed that, that milestone yet, because everyone's different. All right, so social development. Oh, I did want to go back and talk about Vygotsky. I added this, so you want to, I'll give you a minute to jot that down. He is in a different text version, and as I was going through the terms from other texts, I saw his name, so I thought I should mention this. All right, so Vygotsky, he was a developmental psychologist too, looked at cognitive development in children. He would probably have made a big impact on psychological world, but he passed away at a young age, like not long after into his research. But he kind of argued with Piaget's putting, these tasks with these specific age groups, and recognizing that some kids, if you're living in a home where learning is encouraged and somebody's working with you all the time, these tasks may come a lot earlier. So he brought in what he called the zone of proximal development. So it can be mastered with guidance earlier than maybe what Piaget was thinking. And on the other hand, children who are never pushed, or really nobody sits down with them and tries to help them do these cognitive tasks ever, and they're very delayed, they might not go to preschool, it may be later that they develop them. You have to take the culture and the social setting into account whenever you're looking at these mental tasks. Not everybody fits neatly into little categories. So that was basically what his research was involved in. But like I said, he passed away at a young age, and that was as far as he got. So, all right, so this social development. So stranger anxiety has developed around 8 months of age. And my grandson is going through that right now, where when strangers come around, he just gets really shy. He doesn't want to be, even other children, which surprised me. I don't even remember that with my own children. But when he's around anyone, children, older people, whatever, he's very standoffish until he becomes familiar with them. And obviously they're going to be more receptive. Somebody's smiling at them. So, if somebody's kind of scowled, it takes them a long time to warm up. But that's the first really social change you see. Around 18 months of age, they recognize themselves. And it's funny because, like I said, my grandbaby just turned 1, so he doesn't recognize himself, and I'll hold him up in the mirror and he gets real confused. He'll see me and him there, and he'll look at me and look there because he's thinking, where's that other baby at? Because he doesn't realize that's him. And it's so funny just to see the confusion. But they usually do what's the rouge or the mirror test. So they put like a spot of rouge on the baby's forehead. When a baby looks in the mirror, if they go like that, they understand it's their reflection. Prior to that, they even try to talk to the person, or look around the mirror because they think it's somebody else that they're seeing. So, and I didn't fast forward that, did I? Sorry. I got 2 things going on and I get ahead of myself. So yeah, that's the rouge test there. All right. So when we look at social development, we're talking about attachment. And an attachment is an emotional tie. And babies formulate attachment all the time with new people that they encounter. But it's important for babies to develop that attachment immediately after birth. I should have that on there. Oh, I have it on a different slide, which is referred to as that critical period. And we talked about it's necessary for brain development. It's necessary for social development and physical growth as well, having that interaction and touch. That's why they immediately after birth put the baby with the mother or whoever, whatever family member can take care of them. Separation anxiety begins around 12 months of age when they develop object permanence. Bless you. And once they recognize that you still exist, they're going to get upset. But there are different levels. All babies have anxiety when they're away from their caregivers, but there's different levels. And Mary Ainsworth is the one who studied the attachment in children. So she identified 2 types of attachment in children. Secure, and that's a good form of attachment where children, yes, they have separation anxiety, but not that much. They'll get upset, but they're easily calmed down. Like my grandson, they take him away, show him a toy, and he calms down. And that's from caregivers who are attentive to the child's emotional needs. They're interacting with them socially because, we're social creatures and children crave that. And it can impair them if they don't get that. So if parents are too busy and sometimes just, push off that interaction with their child, that can lead to an insecure attachment. And these children will be really high stress. They're very clingy. They don't want to be separated from their caregivers at all. And I told you the story when I followed the bus when my daughter went to preschool, and she got off and I'm filming her going in. And all of these other kids are hanging on their mother's legs crying, don't leave me, don't leave me. And my daughter goes, why are you still here? And I'm like, oh my goodness, she hates me. But she just was very confident. She wasn't clingy or had very much separation anxiety. The strange situation is the test that she used to determine the type of attachment, where she had a doctor's office and with toys, just like you would see at like a pediatrician's office. And she would have the mother come in with the child and then bring strangers in. Children who are feeling secure will move away from the mom, play with toys, even with strangers, or some would even interact with the stranger. Those with the insecure attachment tend to just cling. They wouldn't leave the mother's side. Now, again, this is just in general. There's still the cases where I know that my daughter's cousin, on my ex-husband's side, anyway, their parents always did stuff with them, very interactive, and yet she was really, really clingy and wouldn't stay overnight at anybody's house. So there are exceptions. Not every child who's clingy has an insecure attachment. And anytime I'm teaching any of this, you have to keep in mind there's always exceptions. This is just the average. So, all right, when is attachment formed? I said that it starts immediately after birth. That bonding process is referred to as the critical period. We also talk about a critical period in the next unit that we'll look at, nature and nurture, when you're looking at language development. Remember I said if someone doesn't learn how to speak or been spoken to before puberty, they can really never regain full capacity of language. That's also referred to as critical period. We looked at in animals, a lot of animals that hatch from an egg. They go through what's called imprinting. They form an attachment with the first thing they see. I mean, if they saw a stuffed animal, they would, the ducks would just sit there and look at the stuffed animal. They would ignore the mother. So they bond immediately after birth with what they see. We looked at Harlow's experiment, Harry Harlow, in the 1960s. It was thought that animals did not need this touch, attachment, and interaction. So he did an experiment where he took these baby monkeys away from their mothers immediately after birth and put them in a cage with two surrogate mothers. One was a wire mother that could feed it, so it had milk. The other one was cloth. It couldn't provide food, but that's the attachment, the only attachment and touch and comfort that the monkey will get. It was thought that the monkey would not even go near the cloth because it couldn't feed it. That only animals need those basic needs met, like food and water. He was wrong. The monkey clung to the cloth mother for 22 hours of the day, only going to the other monkey to get fed and then going right back. So it showed that, yes, animals do crave that touch. They need that interaction. Another thing that it showed, these monkeys were raised in isolation, so they're not having that touch, they're not having that interaction, and therefore they weren't growing as fast physically as the other monkeys that were in their litter, and also it impaired them socially. Whenever they were able to, in a year or so, reconnect or live among other monkeys, they couldn't interact with them. They were very shy and withdrawn, and in some cases became violent towards any monkeys that were smaller or younger. When allowed to reproduce, some of them even killed their young as a result of that. So we see that impairment. But we see that, obviously with people too, young babies who are deprived of touch and interaction, that can stunt their growth, it limits their cognitive ability. And we also see they're more prone to like substance abuse later on in life, and they have difficulty interacting with others as a result of, the neglect that they would have suffered. All right, last thing before we get to adolescence will be the parenting styles. So we looked at Baumrinn's parenting styles, and she believed that our self-concept comes from how we're treated by our parents. So she came up with 3 different parenting styles. The first one, an authoritarian parent. These are parents that are strict. They have a lot of rules and a lot of regulations. They are distrusting. Of course, children in this type of home are not going to be discipline problems because they're afraid of what's going to happen to them, the consequence at home. Parents here think children need to be seen and not heard. They don't really have open discussions with their children. These are your rules. This is the way it's going to be, and you have to follow. So obviously that's going to hurt children's self-concept. You're always being told what to do. You're never being asked or talked to. So children, yes, they're great students, but they're not your leaders. They're not used to making decisions, so they're not very assertive. Permissive is the opposite. Permissive parents, they want to be their child's friend. There are no rules, regulations. These are usually poor academic students. It doesn't matter. There's no expectations for them at home. Sometimes they can be behavior problems. Again, there's parents aren't going to discipline them in any way, shape, or form. The child's basically in charge here. And I said before, you can always tell if a child is being raised in a permissive home. If you're standing there talking to the parent and like, you know, how kids will like nudge on their parents, try to ask them something if they're having a conversation. Most adults are going to say, just hold on a second, teach your child patience. You know, they have to wait your turn. I'm having a conversation. I'll get to you in a moment. A permissive parent will completely ignore anything else going on and cater right to the child. And of course, they have very high self-concept. You know, they're always being given whatever they want. They have the best stuff, so everybody likes them. So they think, you know, they have high self-esteem. So high self-concept, but again, behavior problems, and they don't do well in school. The best type of parent that we want to strive to be is a little blend. You know, you want to give your child things, you want to be permissive, but you have to have rules, you have to have structure. But here, you're working with the child, you're explaining the rules and regulations, the purpose for them, even allowing them to take place in the creation of the rules and regulations in the home, and you're warm and open. So, and I do want to point out, most people aren't raised in a home that are just exclusively authoritarian. You know, parents offset each other. There's usually one who's more authoritarian and one's more permissive. And sometimes parents have differing views on different topics. They may be permissive about some things and very strict about others in the home. So, you know, although, yes, that affects your self-concept. That's kind of the extreme. Most people are raised with a blend. And I think that's good. All right, so let's look at the adolescent. Now let me pull that up. All right, so adolescents. There we go. All right, so we started off with the definition of adolescence. There's not a lot of information here, but which is from puberty to adult independence. So whenever you can support yourself. We looked at the physical changes first. Okay, so puberty is obviously a period of physical change and growth, and you hit that growth spurt. That's why you're so sleepy. Remember, the growth hormones only released while you're asleep. You're so sleepy during puberty because you're growing here. And you become capable of reproducing once you transition through puberty. So we looked at primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So first of all, the structures, the characteristics that allow you to reproduce. We looked at the penis, the testes, the vagina, and the ovaries. These are the characteristics you're born with. They're primary. They come first. So the secondary characteristics are what you go through, the changes you go through during puberty. So just for example, I don't have all of them up here, but for females, the hips widen and there's breast development. For the males, the thighs elongate, shoulders broaden, voice deepens. Everybody gets body hair. Everybody starts sweating and perspiring at this time in your life excessively. Acne can appear here too. So those are the secondary. They come second. So your non-reproductive sexual characteristics. All right, we looked at the landmarks for puberty, and menarche is almost always on the AP test. So menarche is the first menstrual cycle. Okay. And I have 12 and 14 for females and males. That's just on average. Some go through it obviously a lot younger. I told you the average is getting younger and younger and younger all the time, specifically for girls. Do you remember why I said that? What is it? Yeah, the chemicals in the food. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. If you read a bag of anything processed, there are all these things you can't pronounce. And in many countries, they don't allow it because they found that it can lead to cancer and other physical ailments. But we allow it because we need the preservatives to transport over such long distances. Where in Europe, places are, in close proximity to where they're growing the food. But anyway, those chemicals are foreign to the body, so the body doesn't know how to metabolize them. So then they're just stored as fat cells. And a girl has to be at a certain percentage in body fat before it can start menstruating. And it's not that they're heavy, but they're just having these fat cells instead of normal cells accumulate. So they get to that much younger. And so they're going into puberty earlier than in the past. So yeah, it's sad. And the hormones too. So here you can see there's bats. I said before, I taught this on Halloween one time and added bats. I keep forgetting to take them off. So you look in 1890s, 11, 12, 13, 14, almost 15 was the onset. And now it's 12 and it keeps getting younger. Some girls, 10, 11 years old. So because, you're not eating anything processed in 1890 that you're transporting across the country. So. All right, and we look at social development. There's a difference between boys and girls in how they deal with an early onset. Girls get stressed and embarrassed and upset and try to hide it if they go through puberty earlier than boys. Boys feel more confident. People treat them more mature, so they feel very different. They like that if they have a mustache or whatever at a young age. Girls, the opposite. So the moral development or cognitive development, we looked at Lawrence Kohlberg here. This is when we learn right from wrong and the reason for rules. So Lawrence Kohlberg came up with the stages of moral development, moral reasoning. All right, his first stage, morality is based on reward and punishment, basically. So you do what's right, what you think is right, follow the rules for selfish reasons so that you don't get a punishment, or you might get a reward. If your mom says, don't eat those cookies, you won't get to go watch your favorite show or something tonight. That's why children do what they think is right. They don't want to get punished for it, or they may get something out of it. During adolescence, you go into the second stage, the conventional stage of morality. And here, you do what's right to fit in with society. We don't like to be seen as outcasts. We had already talked about conformity. We like to conform. You don't want to get pulled over in front of the school while your friends are passing. You'd be very embarrassed. So we do what society thinks is right here in this stage. Now, most adults, not all, go to the third stage in adulthood, and this is where you develop your own ethical principles. So you do what's right because you believe it's right, not because it's what society said. It can be the same as society, or it can be different, but it's your own idea. That's what's different about it. And I gave you, you guys like Les Mis, I'm sure. We talked about that. So, Jean Valjean, should he be set free when the guy from the prison sees him? Should he report him? He's done a lot of good since he escaped prison, and he was basically trying to feed his family and provide for his family. So it's not like he did anything really terrible. But someone might say, yeah, he should be told on and put back because that's criminal activity and he was an escaped convict. That's what society says. But somebody from this perspective might say, yeah, he should have to go back to jail. We just can't ignore rules. Society could break down. Or they could say, he did a lot of good, so just let him go. He's paid his penance and let him go. The point is, it's your own belief. It can be same as society. It can be different. So, all right. Then we looked at the social development in the adolescent. Obviously, girls are way more social and understand others' emotions a lot better than males. So they're more, but they also have this need to be on a buddy system. We're not as independent. Girls usually travel in packs when they go somewhere. Even as adults, that happens also. Males can do things by themselves and seem to be more independent, but not as social. Girls can just talk to talk and guys usually have a purpose. The different stages, and I'm going to go through the earlier ones when we look at nature nurture, but Erik Erikson believed that during adolescence, something that's going on here is you're establishing your identity, who you are, what you want to do in life, who you want to become, and that we play many different roles during adolescence. You act a particular way at work, you act a different way at school, you act a different way at home, and during this time period, we take what we like about each of those roles we play, and that makes our identity up. And obviously, when you get to adulthood, if you haven't established your identity, that can lead to role confusion. He believed that we have different conflicts that we go through in life. If you're able to establish an identity, the next task, according to him, is to develop intimacy when you become an adult, early adulthood. That's the social task. Those who do not end up isolated and bitter. So he said that a lot of relationships end, early for people who cannot establish their identity. Because unless you can truly establish and know what you want out of life, how can you, cater to someone else's needs and wants, expectations if you haven't figured yourself out? So once you do that, then you can move into the intimacy phase. All right. Last thing, adulthood, and this should only take like 10 minutes. There's not a lot of changes with adult. Remember, I told you just a deterioration occurring. All right, so we looked at ageism. We see a lot of cards, and you see shows, people kind of poking fun at older people. I mean, poor Little Mermaid man there with, the bra on and all hunched over, the slippers on. So, and it's funny to pick. It's the only prejudice that's allowed. Why? Remember why I told you that? No one's exempt. We all go through it. We're all going to get old. So it's okay to go from it, older people. But, I looked at I was showing you different cards. This one's one of my favorite. At age 4, success is not peeing in your pants. At 12, having friends. At 16, a driver's license. 20, having sex. 35, having money. 50, having money. 60, having sex. 70, driver's license. 75, still having friends. And 80, not peeing in your pants. So it kind of goes full circle. But we give people these cards. I just turned 50 last year, and I got a lot of pretty good ones too. But I'll just jump ahead there. All right, so some physical changes that occur. Everything changes, everything deteriorates, but you see a physical decline. First sign is your hair. Hair will start thinning and start turning gray. That's one of the first outward physical signs that you see. The skin loses its elasticity, dries up, it's oily. That's why I said people who have oily skin and have a lot of acne in their adolescent years, they like it because it takes longer for their skin to dry out. So it's kind of payback to people with the perfect complexions. They get wrinkles faster. And usually in your 30s, 40s, the muscle starts to break down and turn into fat. It's very difficult to maintain any type of muscular tone. So the senses all decline. Everything deteriorates. And I told you the lens breaks down. So at some point, whenever you get around 40 to 45, you have to wear these because you can't see anything in front of your face. Smell. The cilia in the top of your nose naturally deteriorates. So smells are different when you get older, and therefore the way you taste food isn't the same. Doesn't this sound fun? Because smell's connected to taste. Hearing, same thing. The cilia in the inner ear, it starts to deteriorate. And so, that's why you have to scream really loud to your grandparents or aunts and uncles because they can't hear you. Stamina, it's difficult. That's why you'll see a lot of teachers use the elevators because walking up steps is, laboring. Reaction time slows, and that's because of the myelin sheath breaking down. As we get older, neural connections don't travel as fast in the body. as I said, because of that delayed reaction. And this is a common question too, accidents increase because of delayed reactions. And then people lose their independence, so that's sad. We talked about the health. Okay, so if someone gets sick, whether they get a respiratory infection, a bacterial infection, or even like maybe break a bone, it takes them longer to recover than it would most people, or most people your age. And if they get sick, like anything's going to last longer, but they don't get sick as often because you build up antibodies. And once you've had certain strains of things, we've all known recently now, you're usually immune to it, and then you won't get it again. So they don't get sick as often, but if they do get sick, older people stay sick longer. All right, menopause, that is something that occurs anywhere between 45 and 55, where estrogen levels drop off, women stop ovulating and stop menstruating. Some think it's great because you don't have to worry about birth control or anything like that. Some women get really upset because, it's like a sign, hey, I'm getting old. So. All right, with cognitive changes, we looked at memory. Short-term memory goes way down. I can remember something that happened 20 years ago, crystal clear, but when I try to figure out what I did this past weekend, I have to sit and think about it, and it's sad. I'll walk in rooms and forget why I walked in there. So it's happening to me. Alzheimer's is a condition that is associated with age. The older you are, the more at risk you are for developing Alzheimer's, which impairs someone's memory, thinking, eventually being able to communicate. It's destruction, slow deterioration of brain cells. So it's a gradual decline. Dementia is one of the biggest. That's a question I've seen too. Alzheimer's being associated with dementia and also ACH. You'll see that. Remember, a lot of people with Alzheimer's lack ACH. But here you can see the difference in an MRI. The red and the yellow show brain activity. Someone with a later stage of Alzheimer's has very few has little brain activity going on. All right, 2 types of intelligence. I always use Mr. Nixon for this. Wow, he had great crystallized intelligence, such experience, and obviously it's going to accumulate with age. Your verbal ability, your experiences go up the more things you're going to be exposed to. He used to be a great history teacher, told the best stories ever. He lived through a lot of it that he was teaching. He was old. And but his fluid intelligence, he typed on a typewriter, couldn't use a computer. Somebody had to do his grades for him on the laptop. He couldn't figure that out. So it's hard for older people. I can't use Snapchat. I can't do anything technologically. So if that's fluid intelligence, anything abstract or technology, it goes down. All right, almost done. 2 different types of research methods looking at intelligence. First one was a cross-sectional. They compared different age groups, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-olds, and they gave them all the same tests. And it appeared that your intelligence went down because 50-year-olds didn't score as well as 20-year-olds. But then they look at the questions who were created by 20-year-olds, and a lot of terminology they were just unfamiliar with. It's not that their intelligence went down. It's just things they hadn't heard of. So when they test the same people over time, we do find that it actually intelligence increases as we age. And that's a longitudinal study. All right. As an adult, it's our vocation, what we do, that defines us. And the last thing we need to look at is a social clock. You won't ever have to know those in order, but it just means your preferred timing for social events, things you'll do. You'll go off to college or get a job, you'll get married maybe, and then you create new friends. And it's usually you develop, if you have children, you develop friendships with your children's friends' parents because you're always at those same events that you're taking them to. 50% of all marriages end up in divorce today in the United States. That's possible. Then the empty nest is a question I've seen before. You guys know the empty nest is when your kids go off. I luckily still have my 21-year-old at home, but I think she and her boyfriend plan on moving out in the summer, so I'll be experiencing that, which will be depressing, becoming a grandparent, and then finally retiring. So, all right, I took you right to about an hour, so that was good.